The kid in the Brioni suit told me I was being optimized. He said it with a straight face, sitting in the office I had built with my own hands. Behind the desk, I'd refinished myself. His name was Bryce Thompson, and his MBA from Wharton was probably still warm. He couldn't have been more than 31. "Warren," he began, leaning forward with the kind of practiced sincerity that sets your teeth on edge. "AgriVet Solutions is entering a new phase of dynamic growth. We're streamlining our assets, focusing on core competencies, and optimizing our human capital for the challenges of the 21st century agricultural market." I just watched him. His tie was silk, a shade of blue that didn't exist in nature. His hands were soft, manicured. I wondered if he'd ever had to pull a calf at 3 in the morning in a freezing barn, with mud and amniotic fluid up to his elbows. I suspected the answer was no. "My name is Dr. Warren Hartley. I'm 52 years old. For 24 of those years, I was the owner and sole large animal veterinarian of Hartley Veterinary Services, serving over 400 farms across 3 counties. 2 years ago, I sold the practice to AgriVet Solutions. They thought they were just buying a business. They were wrong." Bryce slid a glossy folder across my oak desk. It was branded with their sterile green and white logo. "Effective immediately. Your employment agreement is terminated. We've decided to go in a new direction with the clinic's leadership. Dr. Chad is arriving Monday. He's a recent graduate, top of his class, very familiar with the latest enterprise management software." Dr. Chad. I'm sure he was a fine kid. I'm sure he knew how to run the billing software. I wondered if he knew how to treat milk fever in a prize-winning Holstein, or how to calm a spooked stallion with a broken leg. My knuckles were white where they gripped the arms of my chair. It was a sturdy chair, made of the same oak as the desk. I'd bought it at a farm auction back in 1998. The silence in the room stretched. Outside, I could hear the familiar sound of a John Deere tractor rumbling down the county road. It was a sound of reality, a world away from the corporate nonsense being spouted in my office. He had no idea what he was doing. He saw a name on a spreadsheet, an older vet with a salary of $185,000 a year that could be replaced by a new graduate for $90,000. A simple calculation, an optimization. What he didn't understand was that this clinic, this land, this community, they weren't just assets on a balance sheet, and he had no idea that the piece of paper he was so proud of was a trigger. A trigger I had put in place years ago, just for a day like this. If you like stories about corporate arrogance, getting a lesson in blue-collar reality, and how meticulous planning beats an MBA every time, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I've learned a few things over the years, and one of them is that the most important details are always in the fine print. The breaking point came 2 years ago, in the fall of 2022. I was 50. My kids were through college, the mortgage was paid off, but the work was starting to take its toll. Being a large animal vet isn't a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24/7 commitment. It's wrestling a 2,000-pound bull in a muddy pen. It's performing a C-section on a mare by the light of your truck's headlights because she went into distress in the middle of the pasture. It's telling a farmer his herd has bovine tuberculosis and watching his life's work crumble in front of him. My back ached constantly. My hands were scarred from 100 nicks and bites. I hadn't taken a real vacation in over a decade. That's when AgriVet Solutions came calling. They were a national conglomerate, buying up independent rural practices and consolidating them. Their representative, a smooth talker named David Chen, painted a pretty picture. I could sell the business, the client list, the equipment, the goodwill for a very generous sum. A cool $2.8 million. They would handle the paperwork, the insurance, the billing. I could stay on as the senior veterinarian, drawing a comfortable salary, mentoring younger vets, and finally cutting back my hours. I'd be able to attend my daughter's graduation without my phone ringing. It sounded like the perfect exit strategy. A way to cash out my life's work while still doing the work I loved, but on my own terms. My wife, Sarah, thought it was a godsend. "Warren, you deserve this," she'd said. "You've given everything to this community. It's time to take something for yourself." So I agreed to a meeting. But before I signed anything, I made a call. I called Arthur Vance. Arthur had been practicing law in our county seat for 50 years. He'd handled my father's will and my first property purchase. He wore tweed jackets even in July, and his office smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. He was the kind of lawyer who understood that a contract in a farming community is as much about the handshake as it is the signature. I laid out Agravette's proposal on his massive mahogany desk. He put on his reading glasses, which were held together with a piece of electrical tape, and read every page in silence. It took him nearly an hour. When he was done, he took off the glasses and looked at me over the top of the papers. "It's a standard acquisition agreement, Warren. They're not trying to cheat you on the price. It's fair market value for a practice this successful." He paused, tapping a thick finger on the document. "But I don't like it." "What's not to like, Arthur? It's a lot of money. It's security." "They're buying the soul of your business," he said, his voice a low rumble. "These people, they see your farmers as revenue streams. They see your patients as inventory. They don't understand that you know the name of every farmer, every wife, every kid. They don't understand that you've got 20 years of breeding records for the Miller family's dairy herd stored in your head. That's the value, and they can't put a number on that, so they ignore it." He was right, of course, but I was tired. "So, what do you suggest?" Arthur leaned back in his creaky leather chair. "We restructure the deal. You built that clinic from the ground up. You own the building and the 5 acres it sits on, free and clear. That's your fortress, Warren. You never, ever sell your fortress." And that's where the plan was born. Arthur proposed we create a separate legal entity, a limited liability company called Hartley Real Estate Holdings, LLC. The LLC would own the land and the physical building. I would sell the veterinary practice itself, the business operations, to Agravette. Then my LLC would lease the facility back to them. "A 20-year lease," Arthur explained, pointing with the stem of his unlit pipe. "We'll set a fair market rate, triple net, so they're responsible for taxes, insurance, and maintenance. They'll see it as a standard cost of doing business." "Okay," I said, following his logic. "But what does that accomplish?" "Leverage," he said, a glint in his eye. "We put in a clause. I call it the Don't Get Cute clause. Officially, it'll be Section 17, Clause C. It will state that the lease is contingent upon your continued employment as chief veterinarian for a minimum of 5 years. If they terminate your employment contract without just cause, and we will define just cause very, very narrowly, then you, as the landlord, have the right to terminate the property lease." He let that sink in. "They won't even blink at it. Warren, their lawyers will be focused on the acquisition price and the non-compete agreement. They'll see this as a simple landlord-tenant relationship. They won't connect the dots." His advice felt like a cold, solid piece of steel in my hand. It was a failsafe. A recognition that these corporate types didn't operate on trust or handshakes. They operated on contracts and loopholes. Arthur was just building us a better loophole. I remembered the day I broke ground on that clinic. It was 1998. I was 28 years old, just 5 years out of vet school, with a mountain of student debt and a beat-up Ford F-150. The land was a forgotten 5-acre parcel of pasture that Old Man Hemlock sold me for a song. For 6 months, I worked with a local construction crew every single day after finishing my farm calls. I helped pour the concrete for the foundation. I helped frame the walls. I personally designed the large animal surgical suite with its hydraulic lift, padded recovery stall, and integrated X-ray machine. That facility cost me everything I had, and then some. I took out a second mortgage on my house. I drained my savings. Sarah worked 2 jobs. The total cost, back in 1998 dollars, was just over $1.5 million. Today, to replicate that specialized facility, with its surgical-grade ventilation, reinforced flooring, and custom-built cattle chutes, would cost north of $4 million. And that's if you could even find a piece of land with the right zoning, centrally located to the 400 farms that were my lifeblood. The clinic wasn't just a building. It was a monument to 24 years of sacrifice, missed birthdays, Christmases spent stitching up a horse that ran into a barbed wire fence, anniversaries celebrated with a greasy burger at a diner at 11 p.m. because I was stuck on a call. It was the place my kids did their homework in the evenings while I finished up paperwork. It was the place the community trusted. Agrivet Solutions never understood that. They saw a building, an asset. They didn't see the blood, sweat, and sleepless nights soaked into its very foundation. So we did the deal Arthur's way. We formed the LLC. We sold the practice for $2.8 million and signed the 20-year lease for the facility at $12,000 a month. Their legal team, a bunch of sharp-suited kids from a big firm in the city, barely glanced at Section 17C. They were too busy making sure my non-compete clause was ironclad. For the first year, things were fine. The corporate bureaucracy was annoying, but the paycheck cleared, and my hours were better. I was home for dinner most nights. I even took Sarah on a trip to Yellowstone. But then the changes started. They implemented a new scheduling system that was supposed to maximize efficiency, but only alienated the older farmers who preferred to just call my cell. They started pushing preferred pharmaceutical products from companies they had deals with, even if I knew a different product worked better for a specific animal. Then Bryce arrived, 6 months ago. He was the new Regional Director of Operations. His first move was to call a mandatory staff meeting where he talked for an hour about synergy and leveraging our brand identity. He wore loafers with no socks. He called my head vet tech, a woman who had worked with me for 15 years and could practically diagnose a case of colic over the phone, the office girl. He and I clashed from day one. He questioned my treatment protocols, citing corporate best practices. He complained about the discounts I gave to old clients who were struggling. He saw my relationships with the farmers not as a strength, but as a liability, an inefficiency. We need standardized client interactions, Warren, not 100 different deals based on who you've known the longest. I knew my time was limited. He was looking for a reason to get rid of me. He wanted to bring in his own people, younger, cheaper employees who would follow the corporate playbook without question. He saw me as the old bull, the one who had to be pushed out of the herd before he could take over. Which brings us back to my office. The glossy folder lay on the desk between us. Termination. Effective immediately. I looked at Bryce, at his smug, confident face. He thought he had won. He thought he had cut a major expense and consolidated his power. He was a chess player who had just taken a pawn, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just put his own king in check. "Okay," I said. My voice was calm, even. The dead calm that settles over you when the storm has passed, and you can finally see everything with perfect clarity. He seemed surprised by my lack of protest. "Okay, that's all? We have a standard severance package, of course. 2 weeks' pay. And we'll need you to sign an NDA. He pushed another document towards me. I didn't even look at it. I stood up. "I'll think about it. I need to collect my personal belongings." "Of course," he said, standing as well, extending one of his soft hands. "No hard feelings, Warren. It's just business." I looked at his hand, but didn't take it. It was never just business to me, Bryce. I walked out of my office, past my staff who looked at me with a mixture of shock and pity. I didn't say a word. I just walked to my truck, the same 2012 Ford F-250 I'd driven for the last decade, got in, and drove home. The first call I made wasn't to my wife. It was to Arthur Vance. "He did it, Arthur," I said when the old lawyer picked up. He fired me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard a dry chuckle. Well, I suppose we should thank him. The boy just handed you back your life's work. Did he look smug when he did it? You have no idea. Good, Arthur said. Pride goeth before a fall, Warren. Now listen to me very carefully. Here's what we do next. The first step, as per Arthur's instructions, was to appear compliant. Defeated even. I spent the next 2 days at home, not answering the dozens of calls from concerned farmers. Let them experience the new reality. Let them deal with Dr. Chad and the AgriVet call center. On the third day, I drafted an email to Bryce. I kept it simple and professional. I wrote that, while disappointed with their decision, I understood the corporate prerogative. Then came the important part. I proposed a solution that would ensure continuity of care for the community and protect AgriVet's investment. I offered to buy back the practice. I offered them exactly what they had paid me 2 years prior, $2.8 million. It was a generous offer. They would be made whole on their initial investment, minus the profits they'd already extracted over 2 years. They could walk away from a rural market they clearly didn't understand, and Bryce could spin it as a strategic divestment. I sent the email at 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. The response came at 11:42 a.m. It was from Bryce. It was one sentence. Dr. Hartley, we appreciate the offer, but AgriVet Solutions is not interested in selling the asset at this time. The condescension dripped from every word. The asset. He still didn't get it. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I was a desperate old man trying to cling to his past. I waited a full 24 hours. Let him sit in his victory. Then, at 11:45 a.m. on Thursday, I sent my reply. It was a scanned PDF attachment, a single page. It was a formal letter, drafted by Arthur, on the letterhead of Hartley Real Estate Holdings, LLC. It was an official notice of lease termination. The letter cited Section 17, Clause C of the lease agreement, signed on October 15th, 2022. It quoted the clause verbatim, highlighting the part about termination of my employment contract without just cause. It concluded with a simple declarative statement. Pursuant to the terms of the agreement, you are hereby notified that the lease for the property located at 1542 County Road 7 will be terminated. You have 90 days from the date of this notice to vacate the premises completely. The final date of occupancy is July 12th, 2024. I hit send. Then I turned off my computer, went outside, and started working in my garden. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. The ball was no longer in my court. For the next few weeks, the chaos I had anticipated began to unfold. Dr. Chad, the new vet, was a nice enough kid, but he was a small animal specialist. He was used to dealing with poodles and Persians, not 1,200-pound dairy cows with uterine prolapses. The farmers, a notoriously blunt and unforgiving group, were not impressed. The stories started trickling back to me. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the biggest dairy operation in the county, had a cow with a displaced abomasum, a twisted stomach. It's a common issue, but requires a specific surgical procedure, a right flank omentopexy that I could do in my sleep. Dr. Chad had apparently never even seen one performed. He tried to treat it with medication. The cow, a prize winner worth over $10,000, died 2 days later. Hemlock pulled his entire herds business from the clinic that afternoon. He was the first domino. The Miller family, who raised quarter horses, had a prized mare go into a difficult labor. They called the clinic's emergency line. The AgriVet call center operator asked them to describe the symptoms and told them a vet would call back within the hour. By the time Dr. Chad arrived, the foal was lost. The Millers had been my clients since my first year in practice. They were devastated. Revenue at the clinic plummeted. Prescriptions went unfilled, as farmers started using their old school remedies rather than deal with the new system. Routine herd checks were canceled. The clinic, which had once been the bustling heart of the local agricultural community, was now a ghost town. My old staff, I heard, were miserable. My head vet tech, Brenda, quit after Bryce reprimanded her for giving a farmer my personal cell number in an emergency. Meanwhile, my phone never stopped ringing. It was farmers I'd known my whole life, asking for advice, begging me to come take a look at a sick animal. I politely but firmly told each one the same thing. I'm sorry, Bill, but I'm no longer with the clinic. My non-compete agreement prevents me from practicing in the county for 2 years. You'll have to call Agravet. Every call was a fresh nail in Agravet's coffin. They had bought the business, but they hadn't bought the trust. And in a place like this, trust is the only currency that matters. The first official response to my termination letter came 3 weeks after I sent it. It was a cease and desist letter from Agravet's corporate legal department. It was full of bluster and threats. They called my action an unlawful attempt at constructive eviction and a breach of good faith. They accused me of orchestrating the decline in business. They threatened to sue me for damages. Arthur just laughed when I read it to him. Standard corporate playbook, Warren. When you're losing, start yelling and threatening lawsuits. Don't you worry. We're standing on solid bedrock. He sent back a 2-sentence reply, simply stating that we stood by the terms of the signed contract and that any legal action would be met with a vigorous defense. Then, silence. For another month, we heard nothing. The 90-day clock was ticking. I used the time to get my own affairs in order. I talked to the bank about a business loan. I called my old suppliers. I reached out to Brenda and my other former staff members, telling them to be patient. Something was coming. The call finally came on a Tuesday afternoon, with 32 days left on the eviction notice. It was Bryce. His voice had lost its smug, confident tone. It was tight, strained. "Warren, we need to talk," he said, without any preamble. "I'm listening, Bryce. This situation is untenable," he stammered. "Look, maybe we were a bit hasty. My regional vice president, Mr. Hayes, would like to have a conference call with you and me tomorrow morning to see if we can find a mutually agreeable path forward." "A path forward?" I said. "Bryce, the path is pretty clearly marked. You have 32 days to remove all of your company's property from my building." There was a sputtering sound on the other end. "That's not possible. We can't just move a large animal hospital. The equipment, the zoning. It would take years to rebuild." "That sounds like a problem," I said calmly. "But it's your problem, not mine. You created it when you fired me. Just take the call, Warren. 10 o'clock tomorrow. Please." The please was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an MBA cracking. "Fine," I said. 10 o'clock. My lawyer will be on the line as well. I hung up before he could reply. The next morning, at 9:55 a.m., I sat in Arthur's dusty office. He had an old-fashioned conference phone, a big black Polycom unit, in the center of his desk. He poured us both a cup of coffee from a steaming thermos. "Ready, Warren?" he asked. "Ready." At precisely 10 a.m., the phone rang. Arthur pressed the speaker button. "This is Arthur Vance," he said. "I am here with my client, Dr. Warren Hartley." "Arthur? Warren? This is Bryce Thompson," the familiar voice said. "Also on the line is my superior, Mr. Robert Hayes, our regional vice president." Another voice, deeper and more authoritative, came on. "Dr. Hartley, thank you for taking the time. It seems we've had a significant misunderstanding here." "I don't think there's any misunderstanding, Mr. Hayes," I said. "Your company terminated my employment. The lease agreement my company has with yours is therefore voidable at my discretion. I've chosen to exercise that discretion. The terms are quite clear." "Now, let's not be hasty," Hayes said, his voice oozing a forced calm. "Bryce here may have been overzealous. We value your experience, Warren. We would be prepared to make you a very generous offer to return to your position as chief veterinarian. We can even increase your previous salary by, say, 10%. I almost laughed. They still thought this was about money. They still thought they could buy their way out of the hole they had dug. That's not going to happen, Robert, I said, using his first name to signal the shift in power. My employment with Agravet is over. We are now in a landlord-tenant dispute, and the terms of that dispute are that you have... Let me check my calendar. 31 days to vacate my property. This is ridiculous, Bryce blurted out. You're trying to destroy the practice. No, Bryce, I said, my voice dropping to a low, cold level. You destroyed the practice. You did it the moment you walked into my office with that glossy folder. You did it when you let a prize-winning cow die because you hired a vet who didn't know what he was doing. You did it when you alienated every farmer in a 100-mile radius. I'm just cleaning up the mess. A heavy silence filled the line. I could picture them in their glass-walled conference room, the blood draining from their faces. It was Arthur who spoke next, his voice calm and steady as a rock. Gentlemen, let me be perfectly clear so there are no further misunderstandings. My client's position is non-negotiable. Agravet Solutions will vacate the property by the specified date. If you fail to do so, we will begin legal eviction proceedings the very next day, and we will sue for damages and holdover rent at a rate of 150% of the original lease. He paused. However, my client is a reasonable man. He is aware that you own certain assets currently inside the building. The client list, some of the portable equipment, the pharmaceutical inventory. He is prepared to make you an offer for those assets to facilitate your timely departure. An offer? Hayes asked, his voice weak. Yes, I said. You have two options. Option A, you can try to pack up everything in 31 days. You can rent trucks, hire movers, and try to find a place to store millions of dollars in specialized medical equipment. You can try to find a new, properly zoned location and spend the next 2 years and $4 million building a new clinic, during which time your entire client base will have found another vet. Or option B. I let the silence hang for a moment. Option B is you sell me back the business. Not for the $2.8 million you paid for it. You've damaged the goodwill. You've lost key clients. The business is worth a fraction of what it was. I'm prepared to offer you $450,000 for the client list, the non-real estate assets, and the remaining inventory. There was an audible gasp on the other end of the line. It was probably Bryce. $450,000? Hayes sputtered. That's an insult. We paid nearly $3 million. That was the price for a thriving, profitable business with the community's trust and its founder at the helm, Arthur cut in smoothly. You are now in possession of a failing business with a damaged reputation, no viable location, and an eviction notice. Frankly, Dr. Hartley's offer is more than generous. It saves you the cost of moving and the inevitable losses you would incur trying to relocate. He's offering you a clean break. This is extortion, Bryce yelled. No, son, Arthur said, and his voice was suddenly filled with the weariness of a man who had seen this 100 times before. This is a lesson. It's the lesson you learn when you mistake a man's life's work for a line item on a spreadsheet. You have 24 hours to accept the offer. If we don't have a signed purchase agreement by 10 o'clock tomorrow, the offer is withdrawn, and we will expect you to begin packing. With that, Arthur reached over and ended the call. The silence in his office was absolute. He leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. Well, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. I think that went rather well. They took the deal. They had no choice. At 9:30 the next morning, a signed purchase agreement arrived by email. They tried to haggle, of course. Hayes called and tried to get me up to $750,000. I told him my offer was firm, but that for every day he delayed, the price would drop by $25,000. They signed within the hour. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Arthur handled the legal paperwork, ensuring the transfer of assets was airtight. I secured my business loan using the clinic building itself as collateral. I called Brenda and the rest of my old staff. Every single one of them agreed to come back, some for less pay than they were making before, just to be part of the old team again. On July 13th, the day after Agravet's official eviction, I walked back into my clinic. They had taken their personal files, their computers, and a few pieces of leased equipment. Everything else, the hydraulic tables, the x-ray machine, the surgical suite, remained. It was all mine again. The sterile corporate logos were gone. The air already felt different. It felt like home. We spent a week cleaning, restocking, and reprogramming the systems. We threw out every last piece of Agravet branded paperwork. I had a local sign maker create a new sign for the front lawn. It was made of solid oak with carved letters. It said, Hartley Veterinary Services, Etarscher 1996. The day we reopened, the phone started ringing at 7 a.m. and didn't stop. It felt like the entire community exhaled at once. Old Man Hemlock was my first appointment, with a truck full of heifers for vaccination. He shook my hand, his grip like weathered leather, and just said, "Welcome back, Doc. We missed you." That was worth more than any check Agravet could have written. The aftermath for them was brutal. Their parent company's stock took a small but noticeable hit when word of the disastrous rural expansion got out in trade publications. Robert Hayes was quietly reassigned to a corporate desk job in another state, a significant demotion. And Bryce Thompson? He was fired, unceremoniously. I heard through the grapevine that he was last seen trying to get a job as a logistics consultant for a pharmaceutical company. He had optimized himself right out of a career. He had underestimated the value of experience, of community, of trust. He had failed to read the fine print. It's been 6 months since I reopened. The practice is more successful than ever. The farmers came back, and they brought friends. I hired a sharp young vet, a local kid who grew up on a farm, to help with the workload. I'm paying him a good salary, with a clear path to partnership. I'm teaching him the way I was taught, with patience and respect for the animals and the people who care for them. I'm still working long hours, but it's different now. It's on my terms. I'm building something for the future, not just cashing out the past. I'm home for dinner every night. I haven't missed one of my son's baseball games. Last week, Sarah and I booked a trip to Italy for our anniversary. Sometimes, when I'm driving down a dark county road late at night, heading to a call, I think about Bryce and his glossy folder. He thought he was so smart, with his charts and his buzzwords. What he never understood is that real value isn't created in a boardroom. It's built over years, in the mud and the cold, with calloused hands and a quiet commitment. It's built on a foundation of trust, so solid that no corporation can ever buy it or break it. They thought my practice was just an asset, but it was my fortress, and you never ever sell the fortress. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. There's always another story about competence and karma just around the corner. I'll see you in the next video.